Kenneth Howell, an adjunct professor who taught courses on Catholicism in the Department of Religion at the University of Illinois, has lost his teaching job there. In early May, Howell wrote a lengthy email to his students in preparation for an exam in which he discussed how natural law theory would judge the morality of homosexual acts. Quote, "Sexual acts are only appropriate for people who are complementary, not the same," according to Howell's email. A student complained anonymously, calling Howell's statement hate speech. Howell's contract, sorry, if I hold this a little further back, I kind of like that sound. You guys want to hear that again? Do you have a chalkboard? I've got fingernails. If you want to bring a chalkboard up here, I could do that instead. Howell's contract was not renewed as a result. Now, there are a lot of reasons to fire an adjunct professor at a university. One of those reasons could be incompetence, and actually, when you take a closer look at this case, some of the facts suggest there were issues of that kind here, potentially. But what I'd like you to focus on for a minute very specifically is the email of complaint that was sent by the student complaining about adjunct Professor Howell. And I'll quote 2 paragraphs of that. "Teaching a student about the tenets of a religion is one thing. Declaring that homosexual acts violate the natural laws of man is another. The courses of this institution should be geared to contribute to the public discourse and promote independent thought, not limit one's worldview and ostracize people of a certain sexual orientation. I can only imagine how ashamed and uncomfortable a gay student would feel if he or she were to take this course." What that student is saying, if you want to summarize, at least as I understand it, is yes, go ahead and teach about religion, but only up to the point where you might offend or hurt someone. Yes, by all means, promote independent thinking, but not beyond the point, not up to a point where you start advocating discrimination. That, I believe, is the principle that this complainant was writing about. A question for all of you, just do a quick shout out. We can come back to this later, but why do you guys do this? What is the point of your involvement with FIRE? In a word or a phrase, what is it you're trying to do to protect or to achieve? Please.
I want people to think for themselves.
Think for themselves, thank you. Others?
I want people to be able to say what they feel and not hesitate.
Say what they feel and not hesitate. Others? I want one here and one here. Shout them out.
I don't want to compromise my art.
Your art. Good. Thank you.
I want the best ideas to win out.
The best idea. I like these answers. Sir, did you have a hand up?
I was going to say the same thing. I think that if you have to tease out ideas, mix ideas, you get the best possible solutions.
Fantastic. You're going to like my speech.
I want people to be intellectually honest.
And?
I'm not interested in arbitrary authority.
And?
I don't want any authority to have a monopoly on thought.
You're going to really like my speech.
Success of cultural evolution.
Success of?
Cultural evolution.
Not revolution. Evolution. Yes.
I was just going to say that the drinks are a nice compliment.
That's why I came. As we say in professional journalism, if it's catered, it's news. Well, that's very. Is there one more in the back? Did someone have a hand up? Okay. Well, I'm getting the idea, and it's interesting because it's closer to my idea than what I expected to hear. I expected 9 hands to go up and everybody to say, protect free speech and individual liberty. And I'm going to guess you're all in favor of that, right? Is anyone here against that? I think a sarcastic boo. We'll find out afterwards. Protecting freedom of speech and individual liberty are extremely important, and I wouldn't downplay it for a minute. But what I'm here to tell you is that some of the other reasons you heard just now are, in my view, even more important and more relevant. You're not just defending freedom. What you're defending from day to day on the ground is the integrity of the system that produces and advances human knowledge. And what you're also doing is keeping the peace in society. And you're doing that by defending something I've called in a book called Kindly Inquisitors, available for only $12 at Amazon.com. Liberal science. You all have a copy.
Yes, we did.
Excellent. I hope you haven't already, or this speech will seem too dull. Let me start at the beginning and try to put a very global context on what it is I think you guys are really doing, what this is all about, and why we care even about free speech. If you read Kindly Inquisitors, you will see it is not a freedom of speech book. It is not about the First Amendment. It is not about court cases. It's about liberal social systems. It's about how we structure societies so that they can make social decisions and resolve conflicts. The core thing any society has to be able to do is make social decisions and resolve conflicts. There is a very traditional way to do this. In fact, it's the way that predominated in every human society until about 300 years ago. Natural societies, of course, were top-down and hierarchical. There was a boss or a few bosses or a chief who made decisions. Authority was personal. Who you knew mattered. Who you were mattered even more. They were tribal. Decisions depended on which group you were in. They were frequently committed to a creed. There was a set of beliefs that you had to hold if you wanted to be a member in good standing of that society. It might be a holy text or a sacred creed or something else. And finally, they tended to be founded on certainty. As a result of being creedal, there were some things that you're just not supposed to question if you're going to be a member of the group. All of that was standard until really quite recently, when a group of people who actually knew each other for the most part and lived at roughly the same time, or at least knew of each other, invented something very different, which is liberal social systems. These are the opposite of natural systems in most respects. First of all, they're decentralized. Power tends to be more toward the bottom than the top. They're depersonalized. They're structured in ways such that who you are and who you know matters much less. They are rule-based instead of tribal. It's not which member you're a group of, it's whether you follow the rules. As a result of being rule-driven, they tend to be open-ended. They're committed to a process, not an outcome. And because of that, most counterintuitively of all, they tend to be founded on doubt, not on certainty. Nothing is beyond critical examination or question in these cultures. Now, this is a fantastic and deeply counterintuitive invention, right? How can a society possibly work if it's founded on doubt, if it doesn't have a leader, if it doesn't have a creed? The amazing thing is that it does work, and it works in three grand manifestations we see around us today. And even those of you who have not read my book can probably do a shout out of what at least two of those three liberal social systems are, right? Name one, somebody.
Egalitarian.
Pardon me?
Egalitarian?
That's more of an adjective. Social systems?
Affirmative action.
Well, that's more of a program. Capitalism, yep, that's one of them. Democracy, did I hear democracy? That's number two. Any guesses about number three? Those of you who've read my book are cheating.
Liberal science?
Yeah, you've read my book. Well, I'm going to have to put up with some readers if I write books, I suppose. They're a nuisance. But it happens. Yeah, that's right. And it's not a coincidence that these three systems arise in the same places at the same time. They have a few things in common, though they're very different from each other. First of all, what they're all set up to do is resolve social conflict and allocate something important and precious. Democracy allocates what? Power. Correct. That's an easy one. The authority to use coercion, the authority to use violence to get people to do things they don't necessarily want to do, like pay taxes. Capitalism, markets allocate
Resources.
Labor.
right, resources, labor, money, capital, all of that stuff. They allocate the authority to legitimately own, possess, invest, and so on, goods and services. What does science allocate?
Truth. Research.
Research, yeah. I heard knowledge.
Truth.
Truth. Good. You guys have read the book.
Yeah.
This is too easy. Most people don't get that. Yeah. More specifically, the way I like to think of it is that anybody can go around saying anything they want, right? You can say that the sun revolves around the earth if you want. It's perfectly legal. You just happen to be wrong. What science does is allocate the ability to legitimately claim to have knowledge, a respectable social claim to having knowledge and not just opinion. That is, it allocates the legitimate claim to being able to say you know the truth, or at least as close to the truth as we've come at present. The second thing these systems all do is that they harness the most powerful constructive force in the universe. Now, anyone who gets this has definitely read the book. What is, in my opinion, the most powerful constructive force in the entire universe?
Knowledge.
Intellect?
No.
Love.
It's closer. No one ever gets this. You guys might as well give up. Anyone else?
Give us a clue.
Yeah, clue.
Clue.
3 words. First word is trial.
Trial and
Trial
error.
and error.
You got it. That's it. This is, to me, the most amazing counterintuitive theme of all of this. It turns out that over time, and not even that long a time, trial and error is an incredibly good way to figure out, in a very complicated, changing world, what works and what doesn't. And the secret of all 3 of these liberal systems is that's exactly what they do. If you think about what politics does, you've got lots of people out there who want to be president of the United States, or you want to be senator or whatever. It sorts through them all, letting them display their wares to the public. Most fail, a few succeed, and then they too fail after a little while and are succeeded by yet others. Politics is not a very pure trial and error system. Free markets are. This is, of course, most new businesses fail, and that's the secret to capitalism, not what succeeds, but what fails. And stuff fails very quickly. And that's the genius of the thing. An entrepreneur tries something. If it doesn't work, he tries something else. Markets turn out to be able to develop and place resources incredibly quickly on the simple principle of let's try something and see if it works. Finally, science. What does it do? Hypotheses. It tests them, trial and error. It does this by floating hypotheses out there every day and shooting them down as fast as it can, a point we'll come back to. Now, here's where some of this starts to get a little bit more counterintuitive, at least for libertarians, the people who talk about freedom. These systems do this not fundamentally just through freedom, though freedom is an important ingredient. They also do it through discipline. You guys may think that you're defending, say, individual rights in education, to make up a phrase. You are, but what you're also defending are social rules in education. In a democracy, the rule is you have to have the votes to govern. If you don't have the votes, you can't govern. You can complain about it all you like, but that's the way it is, and losers accept their loss. In markets, you need to respect contracts and exchange, or you're not entitled to keep stuff. And in science, there's also a rule. The rule is if you want a respectable claim to knowledge, your belief has to survive checking. It's not enough just to believe what you believe. You must check it. How do you check? Easy for anyone who's read the book. Falsify. Good. How do you falsify?
Experiment.
Experiment. And who does the experiment? Other people. Bingo. Public criticism. Criticism broadly defined, not just meaning I sit there, say insulting things about what you're wearing, but meaning all the processes that people can use to test hypotheses and ideas are criticism. They're ways of trying to find error and prove that somebody else is wrong. And you do that in public. Suppose you have a guy with frizzy white hair in a room by himself writing the theory of relativity, but that theory never leaves the room. Question, do you have Einstein or do you have a madman? Answer, you never really know. It's only when that theory leaves that room and is tested by other people that science begins to happen, and you begin to find out, is this guy actually onto something, or is he just some crazy dude who thinks he's Albert Einstein? The communal nature of what science and this quest does for knowledge is very important to understand, because first of all, it's the key to the productivity, the incredible productivity of the scientific enterprise. Now, by science here, I mean not just physics and math and the hard sciences. I also mean history. I even mean journalism. All those fields that are dedicated to finding out new stuff and testing it. All of them are involved in this concept, this broad concept that I call liberal science. The reason it's so efficient and productive is that it harnesses huge networks of people, all working simultaneously to falsify as many theories and hypotheses as they possibly can. As Karl Popper once said, a great philosopher of knowledge, someone who should be much more famous than he is, especially in libertarian circles, the genius of science is that it fails so quickly. Trial and error happens very fast because with this worldwide community of checkers, you can float a hypothesis today. In fact, 1 million hypotheses today, and tomorrow 90% of them will be shot down, and next week 99% of them will be shot down. Knowledge, ladies and gentlemen, is like the proverbial needle in the haystack. It's there, but it's very hard to find. You need a system that can do a tremendous job sorting at a very high speed, and that's what this community, this global community of checkers does. Popper also said something else very interesting. He distinguished human beings from frogs. I promised this, and here it is. What's the difference, epistemologically speaking, between a human being and a frog? I'd ask you, but none of you know. I know, however. Suppose a frog has a false hypothesis about how to catch flies and eats. Suppose its hypothesis is wrong. Well, probably the frog dies. Another frog comes along with the same hypothesis or a different hypothesis, and if that frog doesn't get it right, that frog also dies. This is a very slow way to test theories if you have to die in order to test your theory. What's different about liberal science and what human beings do is, as Popper said, we allow our hypotheses to die in our stead. We don't have to put our lives in the line. On the contrary, we can float 9 hypotheses before breakfast. They can all be wrong, and we live to tell about it. Of course, in an authoritarian creedal society, it's much more difficult to do this because typically to get rid of the social hypothesis, the creed or whatever it is they have in North Korea, you've got to get rid of Kim Jong-il or Kim Il-sung or whoever it happens to be, and that's really hard. Or you might have to get rid of a religion or an entire body of the social structure. It takes years to find error under authoritarian systems over knowledge, if you indeed ever find it at all. That's one of 2 essential advantages of liberal science. The other is, to me, even more fundamental, though talked about much less. It's this. Humanity has a very, very long, very ugly, bloody history of creed wars. Suppose you have 2 people disagreeing about whose God is the real God. Well, one way to settle that is that they fight each other and one of them lives and one of them dies, or one of them wins and one of them loses, and the one who loses has his family raped and his soil salted and so on. These kinds of creed wars are very bloody. At worst, they produce mass slaughter. At worst, they produce stagnation because the stakes are just too high in this kind of argument. Millions have died over the years. The corollary, as I think of it, of Popper's great aphorism that we allow our hypotheses to die in our stead is in liberal science, we kill our hypotheses instead of each other. That's what we're doing out there when we're criticizing. We're killing each other's hypotheses, but we're not killing or using violence against others. Okay, global ideas, let me now bring those back to the work you're doing on campus. Protecting freedom on campus. I know it sounds hard and I know it seems hard when you do it, but it's actually fairly easy. People like to be free. They enjoy being told they're free. Harder than protecting freedom is protecting discipline. And a culture of public criticism, what Popper called the open society, has a lot of enemies. Some of those people are enemies because they don't like the outcome. They think, for example, the theory of evolution just can't possibly be right, and they want to substitute another theory, which is what they call scientific creationism, and they demand that both be given equal time in the science classroom. And of course, we have rules against that in science, which say you can believe anything you want, but in order to teach it as science, it has to be the theory that's checked out. Evolution has, creation hasn't. You have some variants of that, or used to, in academia with stuff like Afrocentrism and that kind of thing. But in the world in which you live, in academia, there's a much more serious and broad threat to the discipline I described, the discipline of checking. And that's a complaint against the process. These are people who say certain kind of criticism is out of bounds because it's hurtful. It makes individuals feel terrible. It's deeply offensive to someone's religion. It's socially hurtful. In the case that I mentioned, the case of this fellow Howell at University of Illinois, The student who complained in the email described his recitation of what is in fact fairly orthodox Catholic belief as, quote, hate speech. Maybe speech offends a person, maybe it ostracizes a minority, maybe it seems to slander some deity, Mohammed or Jesus. These people have, it's important to recognize, a strong claim. They're not frivolous people, they're not evil people, they're appealing to their own and other people's sense of compassion. They don't want people to get hurt, suffer ostracism and discrimination. The problem with them is not their motives, it's the political system that they set in place. And this is why I knew some of you guys were really going to like this talk. You're there already. I heard someone say, around here somewhere, that they don't trust any particular authority, right? I heard some other people say something like that. And when someone tells me that, that tells me you guys understand the politics of liberal science. The politics of liberal science says, look, who can we trust to put in charge of debate and knowledge and criticism? Me, right? You all trust me to be in charge of that debate?
No. We love
Greg.
you
Greg says he'd be great at it when he's not busy dealing with edible human brains. You guys have the right answer. No one in particular. The great political advantage of all three of these liberal systems is no one by definition can run them because they're decentralized and rules-based. There is a postmodernist challenge to liberal science. Some of you have probably heard it on campus. Stanley Fish and others used to be associated with it. It says, for example, all knowledge systems that claim to have any claim on truth are political. There's no such thing as true objectivity. Everyone has biases. There's no such thing as absolute truth, they say. No one is certain. And they say any system of vetting ideas is political because someone wins and someone loses. You may be surprised to hear me say the postmodernists are right about all of those things. What they're wrong about is the conclusion. Their implicit conclusion is because there are all these political systems, you should put in place the political system that most advantages the weak and minorities. I think that's the wrong answer because what happens in practice when you do that is someone's going to have to decide who's the weak and who's the minority and who isn't. And that means the dean of students or whoever it is at the university is going to be in charge of policing the boundaries of criticism, therefore policing the boundaries of thought. Liberal science, as I call it, the open society, as Popper called it, is indeed a political system in the biggest sense of the word political. But so, ladies and gentlemen, are all the alternatives to it. They are all political. The difference is the other systems are ultimately all authoritarian. They cannot run without a decision maker deciding who's in and who's out, what goes and what doesn't go. Liberal science is liberal. It says the only safe person to put in charge of power to distinguish truth from falsehood is no one. It puts a community of critics in charge. Thus, it deprives any particular person of special authority, and thus there's no special authority to fight over. The University of Illinois system, to the extent that it fires people for offending someone, says, but to the contrary, the boundary of criticism and debate is wherever the most offended student can persuade the university to put it. And of course, the next thing that happens is you have a campus offendedness sweepstakes to see who can get offended the most and thus become the gatekeeper for speech, or for that matter, who can persuade the authorities that they have the most compelling and humane case for speech. Liberal science isn't non-political, and it's not special because it's non-political, it's political. What's special about it is that its politics are liberal, and that is unique. So here, in my opinion, is the right answer for that anonymous student at University of Illinois. I think I'd say something like, if he or she were here tonight. We don't know the gender, by the way. The complainant was anonymous. Tough. If you want the benefits of knowledge, you'll have to suffer the rigors of criticism. If you want the benefits of peace, you'll have to repudiate the temptations of authority. Your politics puts you in charge for now. My politics puts no one in particular in charge. If you want to criticize Catholic doctrine, Great. If you want to call it hate speech, okay. But if you want to punish someone who wants to teach and propound Catholic doctrine in the context of a course about Catholic doctrine where it's plainly relevant, you don't belong at a university. You belong somewhere else. The work you're doing at FIRE is, of course, protecting the rights of individuals, but more than that, it is protecting the kind of discipline that I just spoke of. It's protecting the values that make it possible to produce knowledge and sort truth from falsehood, and it is protecting the rules that make it possible to keep the quest for knowledge peaceful. And I am grateful for that. I have particular reason to be grateful for that. I am gay. I deeply object to Catholic natural law theory of the kind that adjunct Professor Howell was propounding. I regard it as, with apologies to those of you in the room who may be Catholic, I regard it as a species of pernicious nonsense. I believe that over the centuries it has hurt, indeed killed, many, many homosexual people. Not lately, thank goodness. But if minorities, like the minority of which I'm a member, know anything, it's that majorities can and ultimately will use any system of authority against us. There are simply so many more of them than there are of us that it's only a matter of time, and usually only a matter of minutes, before they say, aha, well, if that's what it's all about, if it's about authority, there are a lot more of us than of them. If we, minorities, silence criticism and set up authorities that allow us to do that, we give our enemies a weapon which they will use unsparingly against us. Minorities, above all, I think, need to come to the aid of Kenneth Howell. We need to make clear on universities and in society that we are not weak, delicate flowers. The straight student who complained about Kenneth Howell's teaching at University of Illinois said, I'll repeat this. To me, it was very striking. He said, I can only imagine how ashamed and uncomfortable a gay student would feel if he or she were to take this course. Wrong. Uncomfortable, maybe. Ashamed? No. We can stand robust criticism. In fact, we can give as good as we get. Yes, we, gay Americans, can even stand hate speech. We don't have to like it, but we can stand it. And in fact, we are the great beneficiaries of a system which allows it. Because that is the system which allows us to put forth our views, which ultimately, to the extent they are right, will be vindicated, and indeed are being vindicated at an astonishing speed. That's what liberal science does. It understands, it finds truth very quickly. And that's what it's doing for us gay people. It's now showing that after centuries of superstition, we are not a threat to anybody's children, we are not a menace to society, that all of those superstitions are melting away thanks to the very culture of criticism which a worried student at University of Illinois would try to squelch. I urge you, my parting thought to all of you, when you go back to your work on campus and beyond campus, never yield this point. Never yield to someone who says, I'm protecting a wounded or hurt or offended minority or victim. You, the people in this room, the people of FIRE, are the real defenders of the weak. Remember that and be proud of it. Question?